This isn't just a story about a bar. It's not even just a story about a man being ignored. It's about how true character reveals itself, not when things are easy, but when someone is underestimated. Christopher Bailey didn't walk into Cedar and Oak to claim power. He walked in wearing nothing but humility and purpose, testing a place that was supposed to reflect his family's legacy. He chose the middle seat at the bar not for attention, but for observation. What happened next wasn't scripted. It wasn't staged. It was raw, real, and revealing. The moment he entered and sat quietly at that polished counter, the entire story began, and by the end, everything that was hidden beneath the surface would be exposed. This was more than just one man's experience. This was a mirror held up to privilege, bias, and silence, and it all began with a man waiting to be seen. A silent entrance, the brass-framed doors of Cedar and Oak swung open with a gentle creak, letting in a gust of warm summer air, and a man who would change the bar's story forever. Christopher Bailey stepped in quietly, his presence commanding without effort. Dressed in a plain black t-shirt, dark jeans, and minimalist sneakers, he didn't look like the kind of man who demanded attention. But there was something in his walk, a steady calm, the kind only people used to power learn to wear. The bar was alive with chatter. Laughter rose like smoke from crowded tables, the clink of whiskey tumblers, the polished piano in the corner playing something smooth and low. Everything seemed normal. But as Christopher approached the long walnut bar, something shifted, not in the air but in the attitude. He chose the middle stool, a seat that offered a perfect vantage of everything. His eyes scanned the place, the staff, the patrons, the decor. It was beautiful, luxurious even, but he wasn't there to admire aesthetics. He was there to observe something far more telling. People. He placed his hands lightly on the bar and waited. 1 minute, 2. Then 5, still no one approached. The bartender, a sharp, dressed man with movie star looks and a slicked back hairstyle, moved behind the counter with speed and flair, but he never looked in Christopher's direction. Not once. The ignorance begins Chase, the bartender, was known for his selective hospitality. He greeted regulars with practiced charm and served newcomers with a grin, if they looked like the kind of people he approved of. And in his eyes, Christopher did not make that cut. He moved like clockwork, pouring a gin fizz for a couple in business suits, sharing a laugh with 2 women in designer dresses, even shaking hands with a local councilman near the far booth. Every single white customer received attention, care, a cocktail crafted with precision. Christopher, still seated in plain view, remained invisible. He cleared his throat once, politely, no reaction. He raised his hand slightly, not to demand, but to signal readiness. Again, nothing. 10 full minutes passed. Around him, a few patrons began to take notice. Some shifted awkwardly in their seats. One woman whispered to her date, "Why hasn't he been served yet?" But no one intervened. Then came the blow. Chase finally glanced his way, lips curled into a dismissive smirk. "You need something, or are you just holding the seat?" Christopher's face remained calm. "I've been trying to order." Chase shrugged without apology. "We're kind of a premium crowd here. You sure you're in the right place?" The words cut sharper than any knife. They weren't loud, but they rang through the bar with weight. People heard, people watched. And Chase, without missing a beat, turned away, serving another guest, laughing at some half-funny joke like nothing happened, but something had happened, and the reckoning had just begun. Calm before the truth, Christopher didn't flinch. The words had been sharp, meant to cut deep, to humiliate, but he absorbed them like water on stone. He remained in his seat, shoulders relaxed, back straight, eyes calm. It wasn't the first time he had been judged by appearance, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But tonight, he wasn't here to fight back with fists or fire. He was here with a purpose, and this bartender had just unknowingly stepped into its spotlight. With every passing second, Christopher's silence became louder. He wasn't just being patient, he was watching, observing every interaction, every smile Chase flashed toward Weld. Rest white customers every time he poured a drink without being asked. It was a study in bias, and the bartender didn't even realize he was the subject of an unspoken test. People around him were beginning to notice. The pianist midriff stole glances toward the bar. A woman in a red dress kept looking back and forth between Christopher and the bartender, visibly uncomfortable. The man in a corner booth whispered to his friend, "He's been sitting there for 20 minutes. What's going on?" But Christopher said nothing. He didn't need to. He had all the information he came for. He line crossed. It was just after the 30-minute mark when Chase walked back down the bar, catching Christopher's gaze again. This time there was no mistaking the challenge in his voice. "Look," he said, louder now, "if you're not gonna order, you need to clear the seat. I've got paying guests waiting." There was a hush across the room. Several heads turned. Conversations paused. The jazz music now felt like background noise to a confrontation building by the second. Christopher didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He simply said, "I've been waiting. You just chose not to serve me." The room held its breath. Chase gave a scoff, then looked around for support. "We reserve the right to deny service. This is a private establishment, but not a place for everyone, right?" Christopher replied coolly, his words measured, precise, cutting through the space like a blade. Chase's jaw tightened. "I'm gonna have to ask you to leave, sir." That word, "sir," dripped with sarcasm. Christopher stood now, slowly, deliberately, his full height, his quiet strength now undeniable. He looked around at the silent onlookers, then back at Chase. There was no anger in his eyes, only the look of a man who had seen far worse than ignorance and lived to hold it accountable. He nodded once. "Understood." And with that he turned toward the door, not defeated but dignified, not dismissed but choosing his moment. Chase smirked and turned away, certain he had rid the bar of someone who didn't belong. But in less than a minute, Chase would learn just how badly he had miscalculated. The man he pushed away wasn't just another customer. He was the storm on the horizon, a name that shook the room. Christopher had just reached the entrance when a sudden voice sliced through the air like a whip cracking across silence. "Christopher!" It wasn't loud in volume, but in tone it boomed with authority, respect, and something deeper, the kind of voice that made people turn their heads instinctively, and they did. Every single person in that bar turned toward the back hallway as a man stepped into view. He was tall, older, and carried himself like someone used to being listened to. His salt and pepper hair was swept back with intention, and his navy suit was immaculate, paired with polished brown leather shoes that didn't make a sound on the floor, but somehow made his presence thunderous. Chase froze. The smirk slid from his lips like ice melting under flame. His eyes darted between Christopher, who had now turned back, and the older man approaching from the shadows of the back office. The man didn't break stride. His sharp eyes locked onto Chase like a hawk tracking prey. "Tell me, Chase," he said, voice steady as steel, "is that the man you just refused to serve?" Chase stumbled for words, his professional facade crumbling with every step the man took. I didn't refuse, I just... He didn't seem like our usual clientele. You know, first impressions." The older man didn't blink. "He didn't seem like our clientele. Based on what, exactly?" A silence more piercing than sound filled the space. You could hear a pin drop or a guilty conscience shatter. The bloodline revealed. The older man finally stood beside Christopher, placing a firm hand on his shoulder, not as a gesture of protection, but of pride. "This man," he announced to the entire bar, voice rising with righteous fury, "is Christopher Bailey, my son." Gasps rippled like shockwaves. Glasses were lowered mid-sip. The pianist stopped playing. Even the ambient hum of the lights seemed to pause. Tonight was supposed to be his quiet walkthrough of the business he now co-owns with me. The man continued. And instead, he was insulted, ignored, and asked to leave by a staff member who clearly thinks he knows more about who belongs here than the people who built it. Chase's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. His mouth moved, but no words came out. The older man turned fully toward him now. "You judged a man by his skin, by his clothes, not knowing his name, his place here, or the heart he carries." He looked around at the stunned faces of the patrons. My son doesn't need to wear a suit to prove his worth. He doesn't need to flaunt money to earn respect. He's earned that respect through character, through brilliance, and through strength I could only hope to match. Then, back to Chase. You disrespected the future of this bar. A breath passed, heavy as thunder. You're fired immediately and permanently. Chase's jaw dropped. Sir, please. I didn't know that's the problem. The older man snapped. You didn't care to know. With his pride crushed and reputation torched before a silent room, Chase slowly took off his apron, laid it on the bar, and walked out the same door he had tried to push Christopher through only now. Every eye watched him with quiet judgment. In Christopher, he stood tall, not vengeful, not smug, simply grounded. The bar had just met the real man behind the name, and their perception of everything was about to change. Judgment served cold, the door had barely clicked shut behind Chase when a ripple of discomfort rolled across the bar. For the first time that evening, the guests weren't looking at the cocktails, the decor, or even the jazz. They were looking inward at themselves, at what they had witnessed, at what they hadn't done. Christopher remained where he stood, tall, composed, but clearly carrying the weight of what had just happened. His father gave him a nod, a silent question asking if he wanted to leave it at that. Christopher exhaled and shook his head. No, let's do this the right way. He stepped forward, back toward the bar, now with every eye following him, not out of curiosity, but out of conscience. One by one, patrons who had once stayed quiet began to speak up. Sir, I'm sorry, said the man in the corner booth, eyes downcast. We should have said something, whispered the woman in red. We knew it wasn't right. Christopher gave a half smile, gracious but reserved. The silence was louder than the words. He pulled out the same barstool Chase had denied him and sat down, this time not ignored but honored. Another bartender hesitantly stepped forward, unsure how to proceed. Christopher looked at him and smiled gently. I'll take an old-fashioned, neat. As the drink was poured, conversations picked up again, but with a new tone, one of reflection, of shifted perspective. Of quiet respect earned not through confrontation, but through character. Justice hadn't come screaming through the door that night. It had walked in calmly, sat down, and waited until it was seen. A name earned, not worn as Christopher took his first sip. His father addressed the bar one final time. Some of you know me as Richard Bailey, the founder of Cedar and Oak, but tonight you met someone far more important than me. He turned to his son, voice heavy with both apology and pride. Christopher didn't come here for a title. He didn't walk in demanding recognition. He came to see the soul of this place, what it treats like valuable and what it doesn't. There was a pause, deep and honest. This bar is more than drinks and music. It's a reflection of who we are behind the counter and in front of it, and tonight my son showed all of us something we needed to see. Christopher stood then, setting his glass down carefully. I don't want respect because my father owns this place, he said, his voice calm but rich with meaning. I want it because I've earned it, just like any other man or woman who walks through that door, whether they wear a Rolex or wore Nout sneakers, whether their name is on the deed or unknown to the world. He looked at the staff, the guests, the soul of the bar. From today forward, this place serves more than drinks. It serves fairness. It serves decency. A slow clap began in the back, then another and another, until the entire bar was applauding, not for spectacle, but for principle. Christopher didn't smile wide. He just gave a small nod of acknowledgement, the kind of nod men give when they don't need validation, only the truth, and that night, truth had a seat at the bar. Respect reclaimed as the applause settled into a quiet reverence, Christopher remained standing, his presence no longer just seen but felt. Every eye was on him, not because of the dramatic reveal, not because of his last name, but because of something deeper, the integrity he had just displayed. He could have lashed out, he could have demanded apologies, made a scene, thrown his weight as co-owner around, but he hadn't. He chose dignity over anger, principle over pride, and in that choice, he revealed more power than any title ever could. He looked across the room, not at the decor, not at the luxury, but at the people, the ones who had stayed silent, the ones who had watched injustice unfold in real time, and rather than condemn them, he offered a simple truth. I don't want to be respected because of who my father is. Christopher said, his voice steady, low, but impossible to ignore. I want to be respected because I treat people right, because I walk into a room and don't expect anything more than basic decency, and I extend that same decency to others. That should be the standard, not the exception. A soft murmur of agreement swept the room. Some nodded, some looked ashamed, but all were listening. Christopher continued, what happened tonight wasn't about me. It was about every person who gets sized up before they speak, judged before they order, dismissed before they're seen. He placed a hand gently on the polished wood bar. This place, our place, can be better than that. It will be. That night, Christopher didn't just reclaim his respect. He raised the bar for everyone else's. A new chapter begins later that evening. The vibe inside Cedar and Oak had transformed. The music resumed, but the tempo felt warmer, deeper. Conversations restarted, but they carried substance. Strangers connected not just over drinks, but over shared reflection. The whispers that had once carried tones of judgment now carried curiosity and admiration. Christopher had returned to his seat, but now people approached him, not because he was the owner's son, but because they genuinely wanted to know the man who had handled injustice with such grace. The bartender who now served the floor, a young woman named Alyssa, filled his glass with care and a smile. On the house, she said quietly. Christopher smiled back, appreciative. Only if you promise that next time you serve everyone the same way, even if you don't know who they are. She nodded with understanding, absolutely. In the back, Richard Bailey watched his son, not just with fatherly pride, but with humility. Tonight, he had learned something too. Legacy wasn't built on wealth or buildings. It was built on character, and Christopher had just built an empire of it in one night. As the clock ticked toward closing, a final toast echoed across the bar, not led by the owner, not staged by management, but by a patron who stood and raised their glass to places that serve fairness, and to people who remind us what it looks like. Glasses clinked, smiles broke out, and for the first time, Cedar and Oak didn't just look like a premium bar. It felt like one worthy of its name. A new chapter had begun, not in the business ledger, but in its spirit. And at the center of it stood a man who proved that you don't need a name tag to own the room. You just need courage. In a single night, Christopher Bailey changed not just how a bar operated, but how its people thought, spoke, and acted. He didn't do it with outrage. He did it with restraint, grace, and a truth too powerful to ignore. He taught them that respect isn't worn, it's earned, that power doesn't shout, it stands still, and that the quietest man in the room can sometimes be the one everyone should be listening to. The same man who walked in and sat alone at the bar, unnoticed and underestimated, walked out having reshaped the soul of the space, not with his name, but with his presence. And so the story ends exactly where it began. A man, a seat, a moment, only this time everyone is watching, and this time they're seeing clearly.